Hey everyone, welcome back to the DTVC Extra podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and Matt by himself, right, because it's our solo podcast. But in this episode, we're going to finish off our look at the Ip Man series. So in this first segment, we'll look at Ip Man 3 with a little bit on Master Z, Ip Man Legacy. And then in the next segment, we will look at Ip Man 4. And then in 2 weeks' time, I think I am going to go with the Superman series for the next one that we look at. One concern that I had with that was that there might be a little bit of an overlap with that conversation, both with the Star Trek one we just did, because the timelines are the same for those movies. That I think, the first Star Trek movie is 79, the first Superman 78. So I was worried about that. There might be a little overlap there. Also with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we talked a little about Superman there as well. But I think there's a good amount of meat on the bone, both with the fact that DC is a little bit unique. We haven't really talked about DC yet, but also the canon factor. Being able to talk about canon films, I think, is always a fun one there. So, I was thinking about, how I come across, what series that I'm going to look at, or what things that I would look at for this DTVC Extra. And there's a few things that I take a look, I kind of keep in mind as I'm going to do that. I mean, the one is are the movies available? So that's why a few have been ruled out. Like, for example, the Resident Evil movies. I think maybe more of them are available now, but it seemed like I was going to have to rent more than half of them. Same with Terminator. It seemed like I was going to have to rent a lot of those. That they weren't available on streamers that I already subscribed to. I'll rent one or two if I have to. I mean, with these Ip Man films, I didn't have to rent any of them. They're all on Tubi. And what was the one we did previous, the Star Trek one, right? They were all on HBO Max and then Paramount. With the Superman ones, it's going to be all on Max except for Supergirl, which I'll rent, but the rest of them will all be. And then, even if I wanted to watch some of the Supergirl series, that's all on Netflix. So that's a big piece of it. Availability, and not having to spend a lot of money to get the movies. That's one piece of it. Another, of course, is just, is there going to be enough to talk about? What's the conversation going to look like when I talk about those movies? So I think that's another piece of it. And then, of course, one reason why I dabbled in some DTV franchises, and I may go back to some DTV franchises, but one reason why I don't like to do them so much is that I don't want to step on possible episodes for the main pod. And because the main pod covers direct-to-video movies for the most part, being able to do those movies, especially with guests, and now, with me having a good group of guests, coming on, multiple times, when you start to run out of movies, right? Okay, we've already covered this, this actor or this person or that person. I want to have as many possibilities available for guests as I can. So that's another reason there. There were some DTVC franchises that I've thought about, and maybe I will cover them on here. But for example, the Blood Fist one, we did have John Cross on for. When we looked at 3 and 4. So we could still have guests for some of these DTVC extras as well. It's just they're harder. The thing with the DTVC extras is that one reason I don't like having guests for them is that I tend to do them right before the day that they're recorded. And so it's really a tight schedule. Like, the person who's going to be a guest on has got to be available, that Tuesday or Wednesday before I post it. Whereas the other podcast, right, it's like whenever that guest is available, we'll record it and then I'll slot it in on a Tuesday when it's ready to go. So that's another reason why. It's part of the reason why I like being able to do these, is I can do them myself and I don't have to worry so much. But by that same token, I don't want to remove a possible series that, that would have films that I could do, have guests on for. So, like the American Ninja series, like that could be a good one, right? It'd be like a 2-part episode, right? You do 1 and 2 for the first one, 3, 4, and 5 for the second one. But, for example, a really great episode that we had with Chris Kavinsky from Bulletproof Action on American Ninja 2. I mean, that's, really fun conversation that we might not have been able to have if I had already covered it on the DTVC Extra. So that's part of the calculus there as well. And I kind of did, with the kickboxer movies and things like that. I don't know what happened with the kickboxer movies. It just kind of seemed like I wasn't probably going to have people on to talk about those, and I figured I'll just go for it. Blood Fists, I think I did kind of, luckily, having John on for 3 and 4 was good. But anyway, so that's long-winded 4-minute explanation for how I choose my movies. But anyway, 2 weeks time, look for Superman 1 and 2. But right now we're going to finish up the Ip Man series. So with Ip Man 3, as we get into Ip Man 3, I was trying to figure out how to make a good plot synopsis for it. And every kind of synopsis that I came up with was like a good, I don't know, like a 15-minute conversation. And I don't really want to spend 15 minutes going over the plot of the movie. But because they kind of have these two plots going, I was trying to think how I could do it in as parsimonious a way as possible. Just the kind of the basics. The movie takes place a few years after part two. The son that's born at the end of part two is school age now, and so there's a couple things going on with that, with him being school age. One is that he gets into a fight with this young boy whose father, his father is played by Jin Zhang. He is also a Wing Chun master. And so there's a rivalry with that guy because that guy wants to sort of beat Ip Man, right? He wants to be the master in Hong Kong. He wants to be the kind of the head guy. So there's that rivalry there. At the same time, Mike Tyson has an organized crime ring, and he sees a lot of value in the land where the school is. So he has his local Chinese gang or his local Hong Kong gang trying to like force the school out so he can take it over. So Ip Man, Donnie Yen, he's kind of taken up the cause of defending the school. And so at the same time that he's defending the school, he's got that rivalry with Jin Zhang, where Jin Zhang is both at times helping defend the school because his son goes to the school as well, but other times is at odds, right, with them because he's also kind of teamed up with that gang to do some jobs for them and things like that because he's a rickshaw driver and doesn't make a lot of money. And also there's one big battle with the gang, and when the newspapers pick it up, they give Ip Man all the credit for defeating the game, even though Jin Zhang's character, he's Max Zhang. He's credited as Max Zhang in here. I think that what's the character's name is Tin Chi is the character's name. But anyway, so you've got these sort of things coming to a head here, right? Where both Jin Zhang is going to be challenging Ip Man for being the grandmaster of Wing Chun in Hong Kong, and then Mike Tyson, right? He just keeps pushing and pushing. After there's the big battle that gets in the papers and all of that, Mike Tyson sends his his number one fighter that he has, who is from Thailand. I think it's Kook Kwang, I think is the name. Let me see. Simon Kook. I don't know where Kook Kwang came from. I don't know where I got that from, but Simon Kook is the name. Yeah, I go into these. I'm not, it's like I probably should just get, actual notes, but I go into it because I look up through the IMDb pages and the Wikipedia pages, and I take in all of this information, and I think, okay, it's all going to be right there for me. But IMDb is not really a great, have the information right away kind of thing, right? Like there's a lot of scrolling and clicking and moving around and things like that. And so, for example, the Simon Kook character, he's not listed in the top of the cast, right? He's not all the way there. So it's like if I'm just looking on the front page, I don't see him. But anyway, so I should learn my lesson. Every time I say I'm going to learn my lesson and actually, like when I do the podcast with guests, I have a list of notes as we're going through the movie. And whereas like with these, I'm like, well, no, I've got all my notes. I know what I want to talk about. I know what's going to come up, all that kind of thing. And it's all there on the IMDb page. I should be all set. And it's like, no, IMDb is not meant for people to be podcasting, to be like pulling information. That's not how it's designed, right? It's designed to be able to like go in and go into rabbit holes and that kind of thing. But anyway, total aside there. I'm kind of just, losing track here anyway. So when Kook's character is sent to attack him, and I'm already going longer too on this synopsis than I wanted to, even though I wanted to do a more parsimonious one. It's just, there's just so many elements in this movie that are kind of just all over the place here. But at the same time, his wife has got cancer, and she can't tell Ip Man that she's got cancer. Wing thinks she's got cancer because he's so busy trying to defend this school. But eventually, after after the big fight that happens with the gang, she tells him, like, listen, I've got cancer. I don't have long to live. And so he's going to an appointment with her. And that's when Kook attacks him, right? Is when he's at the appointment. They're in the elevator, which is a really great fight scene that they have there. But then at that point, he's just like, you know what? I'm not dealing with this anymore, right? You're attacking me while I'm taking my wife to an appointment for her cancer treatment. So he just takes the fight to Tyson, and Tyson tells him, hey, if you can last 3 minutes with me, I'll leave you and the kids alone, and you can have the school and all that stuff. And so Yen lasts the the 3 minutes. And so now he's like, I'm going to spend the rest of my day, my wife's time on this planet and spend the time with her. Appreciate as much time with her as possible. And that's when Max Zhang's character is really starting to go on this offensive to be the Wing Chun Grand Master. He's attacking all of the masters at the schools. He's beating them. The newspapers are covering it. He's building a following. He's making a lot of money. He's getting a lot of money. He's built this really nice school with this big sign, and he challenges Ip Man publicly to a fight. And Ip Man's like, well, what do I care about this, right? My wife's dying. I'm more concerned about that. So he no-shows the fight, and that's so by default, Zhang is the Wing Chun champion. But she, the wife is like, hey, you know what? This means a lot to him. I want, him fighting was something that Chio, that she appreciated as well. So she goes behind his back, sets up the fight again. Ip Man fights him, beats him. He no longer calls himself the Grandmaster, and he skips town. He leaves town. I don't say in disgrace, maybe in his own disgrace, but yeah, he leaves town, and that's the movie. Of course, the wife passes away. So that's Ip Man 3. There's a kind of a reductive approach to this to say, oh, it's just this kind of this symptom of like the third movie in a series is never as good as the first two. I actually don't know that this movie quite fits that, because, there's some really fantastic fight scenes. The fight scenes with Mike Tyson are great. Those big battles with the competing gangs are absolutely fantastic. The addition of Max Zhang, or Jin Zhang. So he's credited as Max Zhang. So I'll call him Max Zhang because that's what he's credited. But in IMDb, his real name is Jin Zhang. But anyway, the inclusion of him, he's a really great character, and he comes off really well. I think his sense of honor, but also his impetuousness and his arrogance and his pride can get in the way a lot. But he's really great, and he's someone who has really great scenes with Donnie Yen. He was in the Grandmaster as well, so he had a different part in the Grandmaster. But yeah, so all of that stuff was really good. I think the story was trotting on territory that was very similar to the previous movie. Yes, in the previous movie, there wasn't sort of like the land takeover element of it. But there's the whole thing with him not being able to open the school and the fights that were happening there. This is like a little bit, I guess it's a little bit more dubious, but there's still this idea of, the colonial overseers that are corrupt. And I guess also too, that there's a sense of sort of like the middle management ones that are corrupt. They're easily bought off, and then there's a tier above them that can be appealed to that follow the rule of law, and it's just a matter of defeating that middle tier and having the upper tier sort of take them out and kind of put them in jail or something like that. Also, the sense that like there is a shortcut to things, right? The white devil in this case, right? The white colonial or colonist. They offer a shortcut if you work with them, and that's a piece that we get in the first two movies. I guess in the first film, it's not white colonialists, right? It's the Japanese invaders, right? That they're taken over. But either way, there's a sense that you can shortcut hard work and sort of take I guess skip the line. But it means you're sort of selling a piece of yourself to them, right? You're losing a piece of yourself. And so that element is here as well. The Mike Tyson character, though, is interesting because obviously he's not the white devil in that sense. In a way, right, he would have also been subject to that. And it would have been interesting if we'd gotten a little bit more backstory into who his character was. He's just there. It would have been interesting to know, like, well, where did he come from? Was he, did he fight in World War II and just stay behind? Did he fight in Korea, right? Could he have, fought in Korea and then he just stayed behind after and formed this criminal empire based on maybe his military training or something like that? But we don't know. He's just there, right? He's just Mike Tyson. And if you're going to have a just there, right, Mike Tyson's a good just there to have because you have a really fantastic end fight scene. It's a penultimate end fight scene, right? It's a pen end fight scene, can we call it? But it's a second to last fight scene because he has the fight scene with Max Zhang as the end fight scene. But the Tyson fight scene is really, really fantastic. So if you're going to have it just there, he's worth it. But yeah, I would have liked a little more there. I would have liked to know a little bit more about who that character was and why he was doing that because we do get the backstory, at least on the boxer. We know he's the famous boxer, right? We know he's, and I guess the other thing too is that boxer was representing sort of colonial might, and Tyson doesn't represent colonial might, right? That's not really the same. Even if that, I think that might have been the intention with him, was that he represented colonial might, but I don't see him quite the same way as that. So I think in that sense, because he's not going to be when you have a Mike Tyson introduced into this sort of this binary situation of, sort of local Chinese trying to make good and the white colonial, suppressors, Mike Tyson's character doesn't fit in that binary well, right? He's using the colonial oppressors for his own means, right? He's paying them off, he's bribing them, so he has them in his pocket so that they will do what he wants. But he's not them. The same way that, in the way that Darren Shahlavi's character was them, he was part and parcel with those sort of bad middle management colonialists that were corrupt. He fit with them. Mike Tyson doesn't quite fit that. And so because he doesn't fit that, I would have liked a little more story with him. And I think it would have also veered this thing in a different direction from what it was. So there's that. Of course, there's also the liberties that are taken with the story. So, what we know is that actually the wife did die of cancer, but she died in Foshan because she couldn't come to Hong Kong because the Chinese closed the border. Well, obviously, with this being a Chinese production, they don't want to talk about closing the border, right? Because they don't want it to have it out there that like, oh, well, why would people want to leave China and flee to Hong Kong that's being controlled by these horrible colonial powers, right? Why would anybody from China flee Hong Kong to that, right? Kind of not, skipping over things like the Great Leap Forward and things that would make people in China want to leave China. The fact, the lack of freedoms and things like that. It's like, if you have it kind of painted as like there's colonial oppressors in Hong Kong, which there were, right? The Brits, British colonial powers are not, they're not fun. But the fact that like, you have this, especially again talking about the Albert Pyun film, right, on Hong Kong as sort of the handover that, that you'd that so many people preferred, I don't say, I preferred, the British colonial rule to being under the yoke of China or being under the umbrella of China. There was a reason for that, right? And this movie's not going to touch on the reason for that, right? This movie's not talking at all about what's happening in China at the same time, right? And why anybody would want to flee, or it just doesn't cover any of that. It's just like, oh no, the wife's there in Hong Kong with him. So it's interesting you have some of those elements as well that, that again, because this is a movie that's made by the Chinese, or that's funded by the Chinese government, has to pass those kinds of restrictions, but it kind of has that sort of Chinese government propaganda feel to it. And again, that doesn't mean that the themes that they talk about in terms of the white colonialists and the racism and those kinds of things aren't valid. They are valid points. It's just important to also think about like, okay, why would they make certain decisions? Like, why would they make the decision that the wife actually joins him in Hong Kong when that wasn't how it happened? Well, because we can't really get into the fact that the border was blocked off and why the border was blocked off, because it would mean that we'd have to get into why people wouldn't want to be staying in China, why they'd want to leave. And I think when we get to the next movie, in Ip Man 4, I think that's an even bigger conversation, because they get into that, the whole whether the grass is greener kind of thing and going to live in San Francisco or something. So there's that piece there as well. So then what happens, right, is that we this Max Zheng character, I don't know if it was because he resonated really well. I don't know if there was a sense that maybe they knew there was going to be a gap of about 4 years between this film and part four. I don't know exactly what the reasoning was for why they did the Master Z movie. Master Z, The Ip Man Legacy, comes out in 2018. My plan was to actually do separate segments for that and this film and part four, but I just don't know that there's enough meat on the bone for this one, because it also covers similar territory to Ip Man 3. It's just that the similar territory that it covers, it's covered differently because Max Zheng's character, Tin Chi, or I think it's Tin Chi, right? Not Chi Tin. I have to make sure I get these names, get the name correct here. It is Tin Chi, yeah, Tin Chi. He's a different character from Donnie Yen's Ip Man, right? So he in that sense, he's playing that character differently, that lead character, but it has the similar themes, right? Of the colonial yoke, the outside oppressors, that taking money from the white devil and as a shortcut, and what that means. And this was also involved with the heroin trade and all of that kind of thing. We got great stars in that movie. You got Bautista, you got Michelle Yeoh. Always love seeing Michelle Yeoh. Tony Jaa is in it as well. So it has a lot. I mean, and some of the sets are beautiful, like the bar scene in Hong Kong. Like that just looks absolutely beautiful with the lights and all the big signs lit up and everything like that. So you get some of those elements there that are really nice. And so I appreciated that kind of thing. I think it just, again, from a story standpoint, it's not covering a lot more. I think if you were going to watch the Master Z movie, interesting thing to note is that you don't need to watch the Master Z movie to understand what's happening in part 4, right? Nothing that happens in Master Z carries over to part 4, but you do need to watch part 3 to fully understand the events that are happening in Master Z, right? Because that character, he's picking up where he leaves off in that movie. So I don't know if maybe it was one of those things where they knew there was going to be that gap between the two movies, and they thought, okay, well, let's see if something can happen here with Max Zhang or Jin Zhang's his Tin Shi character, because people seem to like that character in the previous in part 3. We can see what happens there, and it is a good movie. I mean, the fight scenes are fantastic. It's an exciting movie. It's directed by Wu Ping Yuan, who ends up he's doing the fight coordinating for the for 3 and 4. He takes over for Sammo Hung. It has kind of more of the wire work and the floating and those kinds of things, but it looks really nice, and so it's really good. And again, the story is in the tradition of the previous 2 Ip Man films, and actually kind of what they do with the 4th one. The 4th one's a little bit kind of even stronger on some of these themes, but same idea. So it has those themes in it as well. It kind of covers that territory. I mean, they're fun movies to watch. I think if you're going to watch the Ip Man series, I think it's worth inserting Master Z in those as well. I think that's definitely worth doing. I think it's worth watching for sure. I enjoyed it, but I was trying to think if there's anything else that I needed to cover about these. I've kind of exhausted my notes, but I was trying to think if there's anything that I'd meant to talk about that I'd forgotten about, and I don't think so. So again, I think that the fight scenes in these movies are fantastic. They you don't go too long without them, which I think is good. They kind of keep them layered throughout. Both movies are about an hour and 45 minutes long, so neither of them are too long. So they all work in that sense. I think, again, if I were ranking them, with 1, 2, and 3, I kind of maybe leave the Master Z one out for that. But for the ones so far, I think number 1 is just its own, exciting, introduction to the character with Donnie Yen. And then, 2 and 3, they're similar but unique in the sense of they have different fight coordinating, so that there is some difference there between how Sammo Hung does it in part 2 and Wu Ping does it in part 3, but it's still kind of a similar idea with kind of the big fights and then the individual fights, and so I kind of would be like 1 as kind of higher up, and then 2 and 3 are kind of together as 1. I wouldn't say that 3 is like a step down from 2 at all. I think they're kind of just there together. The other thing that's interesting is I'd read that Donnie Yen wasn't sure about wanting to make this movie, but when you watch this movie, when you watch part 3, there's no sense that the Ip Man series is done with this, right? It feels like an installment in the Ip Man series. They do kind of hint about Bruce Lee. That's another thing I kind of forgot to mention. That was the piece I wanted to mention, is that at the end of part 2, they hint about the fact that Bruce Lee's coming, right? Because he shows up as a 10-year-old at Ip Man's school and says he wants to learn Wing Chun, and Ip Man's like, well, you're too young. And then in the next movie, in this one, he shows up at I guess as 16-year-old whatever, and he's kind of more arrogant about it, but he still wants to do it. He has one scene, and it's the actor the actor who played him in the biopic, right? So it's let me double. So I thought I had the name before, and Danny Kwok Kwan Chan. That's the name. So Kwok Kwan Chan is the actor who he played him in that biopic series that had Gary Daniels in it, which I haven't seen yet because there's like a 3-hour version of it that was on Tubi. I've been meaning to watch it just for the Gary Daniels factor, if anything, and maybe review it on the site. But anyway, he kind of reprises his Bruce Lee role from that movie to play the part here, which of course he's like in his 40s and he's playing like a 16-year-old. But yeah, he'll come back in part 4 and play that character as well. But I think there was a sense going into this movie that like this would have a lot of Bruce Lee in it, and it doesn't, right? It barely has any Bruce Lee. And you get more in part 4, but you still don't get a lot. So that's another piece too, I think, is that people were expecting more Bruce Lee from this, but we didn't get it. But the thing is that I think hearing that Donnie Yen was saying, that maybe he wasn't sure if he was going to do a third movie. This movie definitely feels like there's a fourth one coming, right? It doesn't feel like they're ending anything with this, and so that's another thing that it's interesting. It feels like the third and a fourth in a 4-part series. So yeah, that take that for but when you're watching it, you're definitely you're not going to want to end on this one, right? You're definitely going to want to pop on number 4, which works out well, right? Because they're all on Tubi, so it makes it a lot easier. All right, I think this is a good place to leave this one. So I think what we'll do is we'll take a break, and then when we come back, we'll finish this thing off with number 4.
It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle.
All right, we are back, and we're going to finish this up by looking at Ip Man 4. So Ip Man 4, I would say, it's been a difficult one for me to figure out how to approach, because it does have some political undertones, or maybe overtones, however you want to look at it. It definitely feels like a commentary on the Trump administration at that time. You could definitely draw parallels to the way that there's sort of the anti-Asian immigration hate amongst whites, especially in San Francisco, to the anti-Latin American immigration hate that was going on in America in 2019. So you definitely have that sense there. And I'm trying to find ways to not get into it so much, because I think there's an element of sort of the grass is always greener piece here that actually kind of dovetails with some of the other themes in the previous movies, right? That there was sort of this idea that, again, these are Chinese government approved films. And so there's a sense of getting into bed with the white devil, or, in the first film it was the Japanese, right? But the foreign devil, and sort of trying to shortcut your way to success is always going to get you in trouble in the end, right? Because, these people don't care about you. And I think one of the pieces of it that I think we can look at is that you kind of go back to that old adage that both things can be true, right? That whether it's the Japanese occupiers, the British colonial powers, or, sort of the white anti-Asian racists of San Francisco in the 1960s, and comparing them to sort of racists in America in 2019, whether it's anti-Asian or anti-Latin American, right? Those things can still be abhorrent, but then there can also still be a sense that either the Chinese communist regime in the 60s was not a great place to live under either. Living under Mao at that time was not fun for a lot of people, especially the tens of millions who died of starvation and things like that. So there's that sense of it, and also too that even the modern Chinese government, whether it's forced labor, all those kinds of things, and you make the case, right, that there's forced labor in America as well, right, with our massive incarceration rate. So I'm not saying that America's innocent in all of these things any more than I would be saying that the UK colonial government in Hong Kong is innocent, or that certainly the Japanese occupiers in World War II were innocent. Nobody's really innocent in this here. It's one of those deals which, again, both things can be true, but the movie's sort of depicting it more in a way of that if you get into bed with these foreign devils as a way to sort of shortcut your success, it always comes back to bite you. And one of the things I think in this movie, when we get into the plot here, one of the things that's interesting is that in the previous three films, when you had this theme, and also the Master Z Ip Man Legacy film, there's also a little bit of that sense as well in there. But at least the movies that had Donnie Yen playing Ip Man, there was a sense that he was above that piece of it, right? That he wasn't the one. He wasn't the he was the one who was sort of the wise one, saying like, don't take the shortcut from the foreign devil. Work hard on your own, and you'll achieve what you need to, right? That there's no need to do the shortcut. But in this film, he actually falls victim to the shortcut himself and has to learn on his own that the shortcut isn't the right way. So why don't I do a quick synopsis here, and then we'll talk about this movie some here. So in this film, Donnie Yen. He's learned that he's got cancer. It's a few years after the previous film where his son is a little bit older. He's been raising him himself since his wife passed away. And so learning that he has cancer, but at the same time his son, he's having trouble with his son. His son's giving him a hard time. And so Fatty Poe tells him like, hey, maybe you want to send your son to America to go to school. Like that seems to work for other people's kids. And Donnie Yen kind of likes the idea. And at the same time, his former pupil, Bruce Lee, sends him some tickets to fly him out to San Francisco to witness a tournament. And he thinks, okay, this could work. When he gets there, he's supposed to get the Chinese Business Association to sign a letter of recommendation so his son can go to the school. It doesn't work out because they want him to tell Bruce Lee to stop teaching non-Chinese kung fu, and Ip Man has no problem. Doesn't think that's such a bad idea that Bruce Lee's doing that, so he's not willing to tell him to stop anything, so they won't write the letter. So when he's going to the school to see if he can find another way around it, the head of the business association, his daughter is being bullied by a girl and her friends. They whack her, hit her a bunch of times. They cut off all her hair. Ip Man sees this and he takes his sweet time before he intervenes, but he does intervene, and he rides with the girl back home and discovers that she is the head of the business association. But one thing he starts to notice is he sees how the head of the business association is interacting with his daughter, and starts to think about how, Ip Man himself starts to think about how he was interacting with his son. He was also learning that America's not so great. There's a lot of racism, a lot of anti-Asian or a lot of anti-Chinese hate that's there, and so that's not necessarily conducive to maybe a great place for his son to be. And then at the same time, one of Bruce Lee's students wants to introduce introduce kung fu to Marine training, and a racist staff sergeant played by Scott Adkins, he's completely against this. He's okay with karate, but kung fu, no, we're not doing that. He's like burning the Wing Chun dummy and all this stuff. And so some of his underlings go into Chinatown and start a fight. And of course, Ip Man beats the crap out of them. He's not messing around. And so this causes a problem on two levels, because one, the girl, right, the business leader, the head of the business association, his daughter, that girl that was bullying her, she gets her dad, who's in INS, to I guess arrest the business association leader, and plans to arrest everybody, right? Because it's hey, INS, right? You just start sweeping through and going through. I guess if a company that's employing illegal immigrants can use ICE, right, to stop any kind of worker organization, just deport like those guys trying to unionize, right? And I guess if they can do that, I guess INS could probably do anything, right? And so if an aggrieved daughter, right, needs somebody deported, hey, why not? We'll do it. At the same time, Adkins is looking for revenge for his guys, and so this is sort of like this sort of collision course to wackiness. These two stories are starting to come together, and it's up to Ip Man to clear everything out. So he gets everybody out of the business association so they don't get deported or they don't get arrested by INS. He hides them out at Bruce Lee's place. At the same time, he challenges Adkins to one final fight, defeats him, and then we win. But at the same time, the head of the business association, he's like, hey, you seem to be a pretty good guy, Mr. Ip Man. I'll write you a letter of recommendation. And Ip Man's like, don't bother. I don't need to be here. The grass isn't always greener, right? It's better to stay in Hong Kong and do my thing there. So he goes back, has his son record him doing Wing Chun, and sort of wants to train him as a Wing Chun master. That's our movie there. So I guess a few things with this being the fourth film in the series. one, Donnie Yen definitely puts his stamp on it, right? He is this character. He has made this character his own over the 4 films. He's grown this character. He's grown with the character. He's, as a leading man, he does exactly what you want with a character who's going through a 4-movie story arc like this. So when we get that end there, I think it's really fantastic. I mean, obviously his martial arts are on point throughout all 4 of the films, and this movie is no exception to that there. But, going back to what I was talking about with this whole sort of allure of the white devil, kind of construct, right, that we see in these. The fact that in the 4th movie, it's Ip Man who has this crisis, right? Ip Man is the one who sees the shortcut, like, instead of working on my relationship with my son and making things better with him, I'm going to ship him off to America. That's going to be the solution. And then when he gets there and he sees the business association leader interacting with his daughter, but he kind of recognizes similarities with how he was treating his son. So there's that one piece, but then also too, he just sees how things are in America, and he starts to realize, like, no, I'm taking the easy way out, right? I need to the only way I'm going to fix this relationship with my son is to work on it myself instead of just shipping him off to America and hoping that fixes the problem. So kind of again like the same way that like characters would work for the colonial government or work with the Japanese occupiers or, that kind of thing. Ip Man goes to follow that path and then realizes it's the wrong path. And so I thought it was a very interesting storyline to put that in there. And I thought it worked really well. I thought that was... I really appreciated that they used that turn with it there. So now one of the problems is that because this is... they want to make America look really, really bad and very uninviting to Chinese immigrants, which it was, right? I'm not saying it wasn't. So I'm just saying, because they wanted that construct so bad, I think it really hurt Scott Adkins' character. In the previous films, the baddie a lot of times would have a sort of like a respect or a sense of honor when it came to fighting Ip Man. And I think I would have liked more of that from Atkins' character, but he had to be this one-note, racist, jingoistic baddie who, for whatever reason, was a fan of karate, but not kung fu. I think the better play would have been like if he was a karate instructor at for the Marine base, and was skeptical of kung fu and needed to be like, I don't want to say, needed to be convinced, right, that kung fu was the better way. Maybe you still have that character below Scott Adkins the one who I believe I'm trying to think who played that character. He's kind of Chris Collins, right? Or no, sorry, Chris Collins is the actor, I think, right? Who's playing Colin Frater. I guess there's a stolen valor situation with that guy because it's one of those deals where like he's kind of known for being a Marine and being a karate he's actually known for doing kung fu, but if you look in the IMDb trivia, they mention that, but he would have been a good like kind of secondary baddie that maybe could be a one-off baddie character, but Atkins's character I just think it would have played better if that was the case there. So going back to that stolen valor thing, it's in the IMDb trivia. It just says that he said that he had been attacked in combat missions when turned out he really only did 6 months as a radio operator, never saw combat. So he talked. That whole stolen valor thing kind of blows my mind. I know Seagal would do things like that sometimes. But anyway, I guess he kind of had more of a one. I don't know. I don't know why I would say he's a better one-note baddie than Atkins, but I think just that vibe of like whoever the head person is that he has to fight, having some sort of sense of honor and respect for him. I think we could have used that in this. So it's a shame we didn't have it. The Bruce Lee piece of it, he's not in it much, and I think that's okay because this needed to be Ip Man's 4th and final film. If this was the 4th of 5 films, then yeah, maybe you give Bruce Lee a bigger part. but it was not the fourth. This is the final movie, and so he couldn't be. They couldn't have him in it too much and really make the movie about him. The character does have one fight scene, so he does fight somebody, but beyond that, this needed to be Ip Man's movie, and it was Ip Man's movie, and Donnie Yen really made it that for sure. And I think the depictions of the anti-Asian hate, I mean, again, the fact that there's a combination of the metaphorical sense of the jingoistic, xenophobic, anti-immigration vibe that was very prevalent in 2019 is still prevalent now. I mean, I see commercials now for the election coming up, and it's interesting because they've had to shift the focus on them because they were all centered around Biden, and now they have to be centered around Harris. But it was like there's these myths about immigration in America that like somehow they're taking money away from things like roads and stuff like that. This just isn't true, but the ads are saying it, right? And so people believe it enough. So it's interesting that we're talking like 60 years later, and the same kinds of themes and stories are being told. But again, that's because in 2019 they were like that, and that's why the movie was using them. At the same time, again, they're depicting this idea of the grass is always greener piece. I do think one of the things about that is that, again, going back to this idea of the Chinese government not wanting to put themselves in a bad light. There was a reason why a lot of people from China were emigrating to the U.S., trying to sort of escape conditions in China. So remember Bolo Young? I don't know if you heard his story, but he escaped China by swimming to Hong Kong, which just sounds so Bolo Young, doesn't it? Right? That he's just like, yeah, I'm gonna dive into the water here and swim my way to Hong Kong. A classic Bolo there. But anyway, so and again, it's one of those deals where two things can be true, right? That life in the regime in China can be really bad, and so you're going to go to America and endure what you have to endure there because it's better than what you were enduring in China. And I think it's one of those things that this movie depicts it in a way that's like, oh, hey, America's not always great as everybody thinks it is. I think from an American standpoint, right, I think there's less of an understanding of the fact that people don't just come to America because they think America is like this Hollywood fantasy. Yes, some do. Some come for that reason, but most people would stay living where they were living if that was an option. And that's where a lot of the immigration, we see, especially whether it was in China at that time or in modern periods. It's just the living situation is untenable, and you got to get away. And America seems as good a place as any to go to. So you head on over there and see if it works out, and then you deal with the whatever else comes. But I mean, I think for there is a segment of the population, of course, that just wants to move around. That's kind of what happens. But yeah, this movie depicts it in this way that like America fixes everything. If you just go to America, everything will be all right. And Donnie Yen learns that that's not the case. I think really more Donnie Yen, or not Donnie Yen, I'm sorry, Ip Man. Ip Man had the privilege of being able to go back to Hong Kong, right? He had that luxury of being able to decide that America wasn't going to work for him. I think for a lot of people that emigrated to San Francisco or other parts of the United States in the 60s from China, they didn't have the luxury of going back. They might have been facing things like prison camps or starvation or things like that they didn't want to deal with. This movie's not going to get into any of that kind of stuff, right? It's not going to depict it. So it's like it's always going to kind of have that one-sided element to it, which I'm okay with. I'm again, two things can be true. The situation was not great for Chinese immigrants coming here to the United States. They endured a lot, and this movie definitely depicts that piece of it. But again, because that was part of the agenda, was that they couldn't make Scott Adkins' character into a more rounded character, which I think would have been nice. I think we could have used that. That was a hallmark of the series that I think we could have used. But again, this wasn't Scott Adkins' movie either. Just like it wasn't Bruce Lee's or this was about Ip Man's story and about Donnie Yen finishing that. And I think this movie brings it to a good conclusion. I think if you're watching all of these the way I did, one after the other, 4 gives you a good resolution at the end. I mean, again, they also kind of sanitize his death, right? They mentioned that they kind of make it seem like he died of cancer because he was smoking cigarettes, but really it was opium, right? Which again, you can't be talking about those kinds of things, right? You've got to kind of present Ip Man as this Chinese hero, this concept, right? That's there. And I think that in that sense, I can appreciate him as a concept of like Chinese greatness, and that depiction there as somebody to rally around. I can appreciate those kinds of things. And I think that from that standpoint, I mean, Donnie Yen plays the part in exactly that way. And Yeah, I mean, not enough can be said about how great he is. And I think, again, with each of these movies, he's exactly that hero that you want him to be, and then they all work out that way. So, yeah, I feel like I had a lot more to say on this, but again, this was a really complicated one because I didn't want to get into a lot of tangents about some of the political parts and things like that. I mean, there's things I could get into, here in the United States, or here in Philadelphia when it comes to Chinatown, and how the 76ers basketball team wants to build an arena near Chinatown, which I think will decimate it the way it's decimated the arena has decimated the one in DC. A lot of those kinds of things that could easily be tangents for me here. And I think, yeah, if I was doing this episode with another person, because one of the things to keep in mind is that these are not live, right? I kind of record them. They're quasi live, but a lot of times I might stop and erase things or do things over. Whereas did you hear that Philly accent there? Do things over. When I have guests, right, we're pretty much doing it live. I mean, we cut things here or there. If a guest needs to stop suddenly, I might, stop the recording and go back and cut that piece where they said they needed to stop suddenly, or if their mic drops out or something like that. But for the most part, they're live, and that's why those tangents get left in. I know Scott Murphy from All 90s Action all the time. I remember the first time he was on, we went on this huge tangent about World Cup soccer, and when he listened, he was like, "You kept that whole tangent. It was like an hour. We talked about World Cup soccer, and you just kept it." I was like, "I did. I just kept it. I don't edit it." So, but with this, I can be like, okay, you know what? I just went on a huge tangent about the arena and the 76ers that nobody really cares about. It doesn't have anything to do with the movie. I'm going to cut it out and come back and start over. And I didn't, that Philly accent came in there again, start over. But anyway, I think taking this movie, the political part of the movies, I think you can't fully divorce them from what you're seeing, or sometimes they're good. They're good to give you a good context of what you're looking at. But there's so many other pieces of the movie. I think you could, for example, you could show these with friends and appreciate them for just the martial arts and the Donnie Yen as a hero and the stories that are told in them. And not have to know all of the background politically of what's going on behind the scenes. It helps. It helps to give you better context of what you're seeing. But the movies on their own are fantastic, I think. I mean, again, to have 4 movies and actually a 5th one when you consider the Master Z one, not have a dud in there. I don't know if we've done that before. I mean, I think when we did the MCU ones, maybe when we did the first phase, right, when we talked about Incredible Hulk maybe being a dud, right? That was a sense there. But it really, I don't know that. I would say like these 4 Ip Man movies. I don't know if you compare them with Marvel Cinematic Universe and whether you get a dud there or not. But I don't know how you compare an Incredible Hulk movie, right, to these Ip Man films. I think I kind of went on a metaphor that I was trying to work with there, and I think sometimes you just can't compare things, right? You can't put things together, but 5 movies, no duds is a pretty good, pretty solid record. And I think that's one thing that's nice about these. They're all an hour and 45 minutes as well, so you can binge them pretty easily. Again, there's the issue with Tubi, with the subtitles not always syncing up with who's talking. That could be a concern, especially if you like to do subtitles with these. Again, I am a fan of subtitles. I prefer subtitles to being dubbed. I think, for example, I don't know. Maybe I should have watched them dubbed to get a sense of what it was like, but I feel like you lose something in Donnie Yen's performance if it's dubbed. I think hearing him speak the way he speaks as Ip Man is, I think it adds something to this that if it was, and even if it's him doing the dub, right? Even if it's his voice, right? Because I know he's a fluent English speaker, so maybe he dubbed his own voice for the English version. Maybe he read his own voice, but I still. I want that performance in the moment. I want how he's doing that in the moment, and I think you get that. It's just the subtitles. You're like, what does that subtitle go to? Who's saying what there? What is that? What they're saying? So it doesn't. It would be nice if that was a little bit better. But I guess that's a streaming problem, right? Because DVD never has that problem. So maybe this is somebody telling Matt that you should just have all these Ip Man films on DVD, but I don't want them on DVD. I just wanted to watch them. I just wanted to see them. I don't need to have them in a collection or anything. Though I think if you are a fan of martial arts cinema and Hong Kong cinema, I think these would be good ones to have in a collection for sure. But yeah, I think 22 minutes. I think we're a good amount here. Again, I think there were other versions of this segment that were much longer and had much bigger tangents and went into all kinds of other stuff that I think this is a better version of this segment here. I think this might be the best version we have of it. So probably a good thing to wrap it here. and call it good. But I will say, final thought here, that I enjoyed this. I enjoyed watching these movies. There maybe wasn't as much meat on the bone to discuss them as some of the other ones. Going to the trivia and only seeing like 3 or 4 things, and most of the things have nothing to do with actual trivia. It's just, again, somebody like going to IMDb and being like, oh, this person and that person started another movie together. Hey, isn't that trivia? Yeah, great. I want to hear about the production. I want to hear about decisions that were made, those kinds of things. Finding out that the Adkins second in command guy, right, is accused of stolen valor, right? That he's telling all these stories about his combat missions that he may not never went on, right? So I think that's important trivia. That's something for me to know. Best trivia, though, of course, as we're wrapping up here, the Seagal IMDb pages. The joke trivia on those is absolutely fantastic. Check out General Commander if you wanna laugh. Whoever wrote the trivia went all in on that one, and there's some really great ones there. So so I'll leave it with that. So we'll do my plugs here as we're wrapping up. DTVconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's where you can find, links to my books, links to the podcast. If you're listening to the podcast, you should know where to find the podcast at least, right? One of the things, you can find the podcast on YouTube as well. So that's a place if you want to check it out there too. Always a good one. But yeah, everyone check it out. My novel, Don's House in the Mountains, available Kindle, paperback, however you want to buy it. Always appreciate anyone who wants to buy it. Bainbridge, my short action novel, still available as well. So again, you want to pick that up. Always appreciative as well. I guess this is as good a place as any to wrap it. So we'll call it good here. But until next time, thanks everybody. We'll talk soon. Bye everyone.
Direct to video.